Gabriella Booker froze mid-step, her hand still gripping the tray of half-cleared wine glasses as the tall man in a tailored navy suit blocked her path and said, "Excuse me, would you be interested in joining me for dinner tonight?" She blinked, staring at him like he'd just offered her a ride to the moon. "Wait, what? You," he said, his voice smooth and confident. "Dinner? Tonight, just say yes." Gabriella let out a breathless laugh. "Are you serious? I'm working, in case you missed the black apron and the tray." The man's eyes flicked to the tray, then back up to her face. "I saw it. But I also saw how you've been rushing around for the last hour, even when no one's watching. That kind of work ethic deserves steak and wine." She stared at him, trying to decide if he was just another smooth-talking rich guy who thought waitresses were easy targets. "Thanks, but I don't date strangers who hit on me while I'm bussing tables," he nodded, surprisingly undeterred. "Fair, I'm Isaiah Nolan." The name didn't mean much to her. "Still no." He chuckled as she stepped around him, muttering, "Unbelievable." Gabriella didn't look back. She worked the rest of the evening at Archero's, a swanky Italian place in Manhattan where the bread cost more than her weekly groceries. She was used to guys hitting on her, but not ones in $1,000 suits who looked like they walked out of a GQ cover shoot. She didn't know Isaiah Nolan was the host of the private dinner in the back room, or that he had not only paid for the entire event, but owned the entire building Archero's stood in. She didn't know because she didn't care. She was tired, broke, and trying to get through the last semester of her graduate program without breaking apart, and men like him. They didn't exist in her world. The next morning, Gabriella rushed through the doors of the public library, her tote bag slamming into her hip as she dodged a group of high schoolers. A familiar voice called out from behind the research desk. "Gabby, you're late." I know," she said, breathless. "The subway stalled for 10 minutes. I thought it was going to catch on fire." Her best friend, Michelle, raised an eyebrow. "You always think it's going to catch on fire." Gabriella dropped her bag and reached for the stack of books she was supposed to reshelve. "You will not believe what happened last night. Try me." Gabriella leaned in. "Some guy tall, insane suit probably drives a car that costs more than my student loans asked me to dinner. Like while I was working." Michelle's eyes widened. "Wait. What did you say?" I said no, obviously. "Are you out of your mind? I'm not getting involved with some arrogant rich guy who thinks waitresses are accessories." "What if he wasn't arrogant?" Michelle asked. "What if he was just interested?" Gabriella shook her head. "Trust me, he wasn't my type." 3 days passed. Gabriella had mostly forgotten about the man in the suit until she walked into the library's study room and found him sitting at one of the long tables, reading a book like he belonged there. She stopped short. He looked up slowly, then smiled, not the smug, playboy kind of smile, just a simple, warm one that made her stomach flip. "You're stalking me," she blurted. Isaiah closed the book. "Took a wild guess you might work here too." Gabriella crossed her arms. "Why?" I wanted to try again. "You rejected dinner. I figured maybe coffee would be less intimidating." She looked at him, trying to read his face. "You don't even know me." "I know enough. I know you hustle. You're smart. You didn't even blink when I asked you out, just shut me down cold." "That's not a compliment." "It is to me," he said. "You're not easy, I like that." Gabriella hesitated. Then, against all logic, she said, "Fine, coffee. But only because I'm off in 30 minutes. They sat in a quiet corner of a cafe across the street, cups of hot cappuccino steaming between them. "Okay, tell me something real," she said, narrowing her eyes. "What do you do for a living?" Isaiah looked at her for a long beat. "I run a few companies, mostly real estate development, something my dad started years ago." "So you're rich." He didn't flinch. "I do well," she snorted. "That's code for millionaire, isn't it?" He just sipped his coffee. Gabriella leaned back. "Let me guess, you buy buildings, flip them, throw fancy dinners in overpriced restaurants, and expect girls to fall at your feet." Isaiah's eyes twinkled. "I only throw dinners when I'm bored, and I don't expect anyone to fall. I like the chase." She rolled her eyes, but her mouth twitched. He leaned forward. "You always this stubborn?" Only when I'm being pursued by a guy in a $3,000 suit. You looked me up. I googled the name. You own Archeros, don't you? He grinned. Guilty, Gabriella shook her head. Unreal, Isaiah studied her. You know what I think? You're gonna tell me anyway. I think you're terrified of letting someone in. You act like you don't have time for anything but work and school, but I think you're scared of what happens if you care. Her heart jumped into her throat. Wow, that's bold, he tilted his head. Am I wrong? She didn't answer. Over the next week, Isaiah kept showing up at the library, at the cafe. Once he even walked her home just to make sure she wasn't alone at night. He didn't try anything. He didn't push. He just showed up, again and again. And slowly, Gabriella stopped pushing him away. They went to dinner not at Archeros, but a tiny hole in the wall Thai place she loved. He asked questions. He listened. He made her laugh until she forgot about how exhausted she was. She found herself looking forward to seeing him, craving it. One evening, they sat on a bench overlooking the river, city lights twinkling in the distance. Isaiah glanced at her. What if I told you I haven't stopped thinking about you since the first night I saw you? Gabriella looked away. I'd say you're insane. I might be, she smiled, then said quietly, I don't know how to do this. I'm not good at letting people in. I'm not asking for all of you right now, he said, just a little. She met his eyes. I can give you a little. And just like that, something shifted. The girl who always said no didn't. Gabriella stepped off the elevator and into the worn hallway outside her apartment, the overhead light flickering twice before going dim. She juggled a paper bag of groceries against her hip, careful not to drop the eggs. When she reached her door, she noticed the envelope taped to the frame, her name written in clean, purposeful handwriting. She peeled it off cautiously, glancing down both ends of the hall. Inside was a simple note, tomorrow, 7 o'clock. 1 hour of your time, I'll bring the questions. You bring the honesty. Isaiah, no location, no instructions, just a second slip of paper with an address she didn't recognize. Gabriella stared at it, her grip tightening on the envelope. He was persistent, but not in the way that made her want to run. In the way that made her curious, unsettlingly so. The next evening, she found herself standing in front of an unmarked black car idling by the curb outside the address. A driver stepped out wordlessly and opened the back door. This is too much, she said, half to herself. Miss Booker? The driver asked, holding the door. She hesitated only a second longer before sliding in. The car took her through quiet streets that curved away from the city's chaos toward a neighborhood she'd only seen in glossy magazines. The homes here weren't just expensive. They were untouchable. When the car stopped, she stepped out onto a private driveway lined with trees wrapped in soft white lights. At the top of the stone steps stood Isaiah, hands tucked into his coat pockets. You rented a house just to ask me questions, she said as she climbed toward him. I live here, he replied. Didn't want to make a thing of it last time. She paused on the top step. You live alone in this? Technically, yes, but the housekeeper and her husband occupy the guest house. So I guess not entirely. She followed him inside, her eyes scanning the high ceilings, the soft lighting, the artwork that looked like it belonged in a gallery. He didn't explain any of it. He just led her to a sunken living room where a fire crackled in a minimalist hearth and 2 glasses of water waited on a low table. Why water? She asked, sitting. I want you clear-headed when you answer. She raised a brow. You're really doing this. I told you. 1 hour. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket, flipped it open, and looked at her. Who's the one person in your life you trust without question? Her lips parted slightly. That's the first question, Isaiah nodded. Gabriella stared at the flames, then said, my godmother. She raised me after my mom passed. She never asked for anything in return. He scribbled something down. What's the one thing you're most afraid of? Dependence, she said without hesitation. Needing someone who might leave. Isaiah glanced up at that, then back to the page. What's your dream? To build something that doesn't fall apart when I'm gone. He looked at her. You mean like a legacy? No, I mean something stronger than chance. Something I built with my own hands that can't be taken away. Like what? A school, she said. A real one. Funded, safe, with teachers who don't leave mid-semester because their rent went up. A place where kids know someone's sticking around. Isaiah's pen didn't move. What would you do if someone gave you the money to make that happen? Her eyes narrowed. Are you offering? I'm asking. I'd take it, she said slowly, but I'd never let them control it. He closed the notebook and set it down. That's all. Gabriella leaned back, crossing her arms. That's it, no follow-up interrogation. Nope. Just wanted to know more than your favorite color. She glanced around the room. So what now? You send me home in that car and disappear again. I was hoping you'd stay for dinner, he said. But not the kind that comes with a white tablecloth and a sommelier. He led her through a side door and into a kitchen that looked like it belonged on a cooking show. Sleek counters, warm lighting, and a view of the yard through floor-to-ceiling windows. On the counter sat a brown paper bag from the same market she shopped at weekly. You went to Goldie's, she asked with a surprised laugh. You hate pretense, remember? He replied. He peeled vegetables while she stirred a simmering pot on the stove. They moved easily around each other, and for a moment it felt like something normal. Not a game, not a pursuit. Just two people trying not to mess up dinner. As they sat across from each other at the breakfast bar, Gabriella looked up from her plate. Why me? Isaiah didn't pretend to misunderstand. Because you're the first person who made me question whether I've ever actually listened when someone spoke. She blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. You don't act impressed, he continued. You don't care about the noise. You make me want to be quiet. Gabriella stared at him, her fork frozen midway to her mouth. I don't know how to respond to that, she said softly. You don't have to, just don't disappear. She didn't. Not that night. They ate, then sat in silence while the fire in the other room burned low. When he drove her home himself, he didn't try to kiss her. He walked her to the door and waited until she turned the key. Inside, she leaned against the door and let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The next morning, she found a small white box on her doormat. Inside was a fountain pen the shade of midnight and a note written in his handwriting. For the school you're going to build. Start writing the plan. I'll wait. Gabriella stood frozen in the middle of the empty classroom, the pen Isaiah had gifted her resting between her fingers. Her eyes locked on the whiteboard in front of her, where she'd outlined the first steps of her dream project, a school that could actually change lives. She hadn't told anyone yet. Not about the pen. Not about the night at his house. Not even about the steady way Isaiah had started weaving himself into her life without ever asking for permission. The door creaked open behind her. You skipped lunch, Michelle said, stepping inside and tossing a sandwich onto the desk. Again, Gabriella turned, startled. I lost track of time. No, you're avoiding me. What's going on? She hesitated, then sat down, the pen still in her hand. I think I'm falling for him. Michelle blinked. Seriously, Gabriella nodded slowly, and it scares the hell out of me. Michelle dropped into the chair beside her. Is he moving too fast? No, that's the thing, he's not pushing, he's just there all the time, showing up when I don't expect him, saying things that make me feel seen in a way I've never felt before. Michelle narrowed her eyes. What does he want? I don't know yet, Gabriella admitted. But he hasn't asked for anything, and he listens. Really listens. You trust him, Gabriella considered that. More than I should, Michelle leaned back. So what's the problem? Gabriella glanced down at the pen. I'm not used to things being given. I've always had to fight for everything. Having someone just offer support without strings. It doesn't feel real, Michelle stood. Maybe it's time you let something be easy for once. Gabriella didn't answer, but she didn't let go of the pen either. Later that evening, she met Isaiah outside a building she didn't recognize. He waited by the entrance, dressed more casually than she'd ever seen him, dark jeans, rolled sleeves, and a messenger bag slung over his shoulder. You brought me to a warehouse, she asked, stepping out of the cab. It's not a warehouse anymore. Come on. Inside was a vast, open space with exposed beams and dust-covered windows. Light pooled through the cracks in the ceiling, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. It smelled like old wood and forgotten dreams. "What is this place?" she asked, her voice echoing. Isaiah set the bag down and unzipped it. "A property I bought last year. It was supposed to be turned into luxury condos." She raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess, you changed your mind." "I did," he said, pulling out a thick folder. "Because now I think it should be a school." Gabriella's breath caught. "I ran the numbers," he continued. "The zoning's right. The location is close to public transit. It needs work, but the bones are solid. And if you're willing to build your dream, I'll fund it." She stared at him, stunned. "But I don't want to own it," he added. "This would be yours, your name, your vision. I just want to help make it real." Gabriella took a shaky breath. "Why are you doing this?" Isaiah looked at her, his expression serious. "Because I believe in you. And because I want you to believe there are people in this world who don't leave." Her throat tightened. "You barely know me." "I know enough," he said. "And every day I learn more, like how you reread the same pages when you're thinking. Or how you walk faster when you're pretending not to be nervous." She looked down at the file in his hands. "This is insane." "Sometimes the things worth doing are," he said, "but I'm not asking you to say yes tonight, just don't say no." She didn't take the folder, not yet. But she didn't walk away either. That weekend, they met again, but this time on neutral ground. A community center in Brooklyn was hosting a youth art exhibit, and Gabriella had volunteered to supervise. She hadn't expected Isaiah to actually show up when she mentioned it. But there he was, crouched beside a 10-year-old explaining the difference between abstract and impressionist styles without a hint of condescension. The boy beamed like someone had just handed him the keys to the world. When Isaiah stood, Gabriella was waiting by the snack table. "You're good with kids," she said. He shrugged. "They don't fake things, it's refreshing. You surprised me." He picked up a plastic cup of fruit punch. "How? I didn't think you'd come to this." "I told you I want to know your world. That includes the parts without catered lighting and valet parking." She tilted her head. "What happened to you?" He chuckled softly. "What do you mean? You weren't always like this. Something changed you." Isaiah's jaw tightened slightly. "My father died 2 years ago. We weren't close. But he left everything to me. I spent a year trying to be the version of myself I thought he wanted. Then I realized that version wasn't worth much." Gabriella didn't look away. "And now I build things that matter. Or at least I try to." They stood in silence for a long moment before she said, "I'll take the file." He nodded once. "Good, but I'm not promising anything." "I'm not asking for promises," he said. "Just a chance." That night, she sat at her kitchen table with the folder spread open, the blueprint of a future she'd never dared hope for staring back at her. Her phone buzzed once, a reminder for her evening shift, but she ignored it for a moment longer. Because for the first time in her life, the future wasn't a wall she had to scale. It was a door someone had quietly left open. Rain slid in rivulets down the cafe window, blurring the skyline beyond. Gabriella sat quietly at the corner table, her fingers curled around a cooling cup of tea. She hadn't touched it since she sat down. The file folder lay open in front of her, pages marked, notes scribbled in the margins. She wasn't reading anymore, she was thinking. Deeply. She didn't notice Isaiah until he approached the table, his coat damp from the rain and his eyes scanning hers. "You've been here a while," he said gently, pulling out the chair across from her. "I needed quiet," she replied, her voice low. "The building is never quiet." He didn't press. He just sat, watching her with a patience that still caught her off guard. "I've been working through the numbers," she said after a moment. "Your proposal covers everything: renovation, staffing, materials, even community workshops. It's not just generous, it's exact." Isaiah leaned forward slightly. "I've been building things a long time. I've learned that generosity without structure turns to chaos." Gabriella nodded slowly. "You even put in a clause protecting me from being removed as head of operations, even if the school changes hands. That's not common." "I don't want you to answer to anyone who doesn't understand your mission," he said. "If this is going to work, it has to be yours." She looked at him carefully. You keep saying that, yours, but what about you? Where do you fit into this? He didn't hesitate. I'll be here as long as you want me. Her breath caught not from the words but from the way he said them, quietly, with certainty but no pressure. I'm not used to having someone in my life who doesn't. Take, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isaiah reached across the table and tapped the edge of the folder. Then let me be the first person who gives without asking for anything back. She stared at him, and for the first time in weeks, her doubt cracked open just enough to let something else in. Hope. He stood, pulling a folded piece of paper from his coat. I need to show you something, he said. If you're not ready, I'll wait, but if you are, come. She hesitated for only a second before nodding and sliding the folder into her bag. They drove across the bridge, the city falling away behind them. When the car stopped, they stepped out into a quiet neighborhood lined with brownstones and young trees. The air smelled of wet pavement and early spring. This used to be a shelter, Isaiah said, unlocking the gate to a modest two-story building with faded red brick. It was shut down 3 years ago. The city tried to repurpose it, but the funding dried up. Gabriella stepped inside. The floor creaked beneath her boots, and the walls were still painted in cheerful yellows and blues, though the colors had faded. Isaiah flipped a light switch. Only one flickered to life. I've kept the deed, he said. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. I didn't know why at the time. Now I do. She turned to him, brow furrowed. This can be your pilot campus, he said. The school doesn't have to wait for permits and contractors. This building is already zoned for education. It just needs life again. Gabriella walked slowly through the narrow hallway, running her fingers along the wall. In one room, a corkboard still held a child's drawing of a bird with too many wings. This feels right, she whispered. Isaiah stepped into the doorway. You can start small. Build from here. Prove the model works, then we scale, she turned to him. Why do you keep doing this? Because I've spent years pouring money into towers and hotels and things that impress people who forget me the moment I leave the room, he said, voice steady. But this, you make me remember why I started in the first place. He closed the distance between them, not touching her, just standing close enough for her to feel the honesty radiating off him. I never wanted to fall for someone who'd challenge every part of me, he said. But then you walked away from me the first night we met, and I haven't stopped chasing you since. Her heart pounded in her chest. You're not chasing anymore, she said. You're here. He finally reached for her hand, his fingers threading through hers. I'm not going anywhere, he said. Unless you ask me to, she shook her head, tears blurring her vision. Then stay. He pulled her into his arms, and the moment she melted against him, something inside her finally settled. The fear, the doubt, the walls she'd built around her heart, they didn't shatter, they just dissolved. 2 months later, the school opened its doors. The building had fresh paint, new furniture, and a sign above the entrance that read, "The Booker Foundation for Learning." Gabriella stood in front of the ribbon with a pair of oversized scissors in her hands, surrounded by community leaders, parents, and dozens of children who didn't know yet that their lives were about to change. Isaiah stood at her side, dressed in a pressed charcoal suit, not because he needed to impress, but because he wanted to honor the moment. You ready? He asked. She smiled. More than I've ever been. The crowd cheered as she cut the ribbon. That night, Isaiah surprised her with a rooftop dinner overlooking the city. No press, no photographers, just candlelight, music, and the sound of her laughter carried on the breeze. He handed her a small velvet box. Inside wasn't a ring, it was a silver key. To the next building, he said. Wherever you decide it should be. She closed the box carefully, then looked up at him. I don't need anything else, she said. Just you. He kissed her slow, deep, reverent. And when the sky broke open into stars above them, Gabriella knew this wasn't the end of something impossible. It was the beginning of something real, something earned, and for the first time in her life she didn't feel like she was chasing a future on her own, because she wasn't, she was building it with him beside her. Always. The sun filtered through tall windows, casting golden light across the polished wood floors of the newly opened Booker Foundation for Learning. The muffled sounds of children laughing and footsteps echoing down the hallway filled the space with life. Gabriella stood behind her office desk, organizing a set of curriculum proposals when a gentle knock sounded. She looked up. "Come in." Isaiah stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the community cafe a few blocks away. "Morning, Principal," she laughed. "We've talked about that." "I'm not calling myself Principal." "You can't keep dodging titles forever," he said, placing 1 cup on her desk. "You built this, you're allowed to own it." She took a sip, humming in appreciation. "Still warm." "I ran," Isaiah said. "And I had to bribe the barista to make it extra strong." Gabriella leaned back in her chair, eyes softening as she studied him. "You didn't have to bring me coffee." "Didn't I?" he asked, tilting his head. "You've been here since 6. Again." The after-school program proposal needed revisions. "I didn't want the board to think we weren't prepared." Isaiah walked around the desk and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "You've already proven more in 1 month than most people do in a year. You don't need to keep setting yourself on fire to prove you're worth the match." She stilled under his touch, then reached up and laced her fingers through his. "I'm not trying to prove anything anymore, I just want to get it right." "You already are," he replied. "But that board meeting isn't until tomorrow. Come with me." She looked up at him. "Now, I'm not taking no for an answer." He led her outside where a black SUV waited. She raised an eyebrow as he opened the door. "You're not kidnapping me, are you?" "Only temporarily," he said. "You'll be back before lunch." The car took them through winding streets until they pulled up in front of a modest brick building with a metal sign that read, "Eastbrook Community Center." Gabriella turned to him as they stepped out. "Why here?" Isaiah didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked them inside where a woman in her 60s greeted them with a warm smile and a clipboard. "Miss Booker," she asked, "we've been expecting you." Gabriella looked between her and Isaiah. "What is this?" He gestured toward a set of glass doors. "Come see." They stepped into a newly renovated wing of the center. Inside were 3 classrooms, freshly painted and fully furnished, shelves lined with books, desks arranged in circles, and a reading nook in the corner with colorful rugs and beanbags. "This is our satellite program," Isaiah said. "For children who can't travel to the main campus. We've partnered with the local council to keep it accessible." Gabriella turned slowly, taking it all in. "When did you do this?" "I didn't," he said. "You did. Every time you talked about the kids who fall through the cracks. Every time you scribbled notes in the middle of the night. I just listened and made the calls." Her voice caught. "You remembered every word." "Of course I did." They walked through the rooms, Gabriella running her fingers along the edges of the desks, pausing beside a hand-painted mural on the back wall. It depicted children holding hands beneath a tree whose branches reached into the sky. "This is what I wanted," she said softly. "Not just a school, but something that grows." Isaiah stepped behind her, wrapping his arms gently around her waist. "Then grow it. I'll help you plant every seed." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "You've given me more than I ever thought I'd have," he shook his head. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already deserve, I just cleared the path." She smiled, eyes shining. "So what happens next? We build, we love, we live," he said. "And I ask you one very important question." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Gabriella's breath hitched as he opened it, revealing a ring with a delicate band wrapped around a sapphire nestled in diamonds. Isaiah dropped to one knee. "I don't want to build this life unless it's with you. Not the schools, not the homes, not the future, just you. Will you marry me?" Tears spilled down her cheeks before she could control them. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaiah." "Always?" He stood, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss that melted every wall she'd ever built. The staff clapped quietly from the hallway, and somewhere down the corridor, a child's laughter echoed like a promise. They married 6 months later in a small garden ceremony behind the school. The children helped decorate, stringing paper cranes from the trees and placing wildflowers in glass jars. Gabriella wore a simple ivory dress, her curls pinned with jasmine. Isaiah couldn't take his eyes off her. As they exchanged vows, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. He spoke of the first moment he saw her and how he'd never believed in fate until she walked past him with a tray of wine glasses and a world in her eyes. She spoke of the man who broke down her walls not with force but with presence and patience. They danced under twinkling lights, surrounded by friends, students, and the community they'd begun to build together. No press, no extravagance, just love rooted deep. A year later, the Booker Foundation expanded again, this time to a rural town where resources had always been scarce. Gabriella stood at the ribbon once more, but this time with Isaiah holding their newborn daughter in his arms. She kissed his cheek as the crowd clapped, her heart full. "You did it," he whispered. "We did," she replied. And in that moment, surrounded by everything they had created and everything still to come, Gabriella knew she was no longer surviving, she was home, in every way that mattered.